Good morning, and thanks for being with us today. It's truly a pleasure to see all of you here. It's just a great feeling to have us here together in person with a big full room. We did this last year in Seattle, and we had a great group, but I'm glad to see we've added to our numbers and added to our sponsors and are ready to have a really nice morning. Please continue to enjoy your breakfast while I do a few preliminary things here. I want to make sure, first of all, that I acknowledge and thank our special guests, our panelists, who we'll bring to the stage in a few moments. Ann Artizone is a Vice President for Supply Chain at Alaska Airlines. Kathy Bloomquist is the Vice President of Sales at DTH Expeditors Incorporated. Jeff Laub is the Vice President for Supply Chain Operations at Kestra Medical Technologies Incorporated. And Adam Peterson is the Director of Supply Operations and the Cloud Supply Chain at Microsoft. So thanks to our panelists for being here. I want to especially welcome our EMBA, that's our Executive MBA, and our MBA students in attendance today. They've taken time out from attending the WSU EMBA Leadership Conference to participate. I note that this is one of the few events they do in person since our EMBA and MBA degrees are entirely online, nationally ranked for online MBA programs, I should note. And so welcome to all students who are in attendance today. Thanks for being here. Earlier, I mentioned our sponsors, to whom we're very grateful. Our Crimson sponsors include Alaska Airlines, DTH Expeditors, and Pearson. Thanks to our Crimson sponsors. Our gray sponsor, newly named, CBiz Bernson Porter. Thank you very much. And very appreciative also of our table sponsors, BECU, Cougs First, KPMG, Liberty Mutual Insurance, Safeco Insurance, and Unify Consulting. Thanks again to our sponsors. Also pleased to note that there are a number of members of the Carson College National Board of Advisors in our audience. These alumni and friends of the college, very important to us, have shaped the things we're doing in the college now and will be doing in the future. So thanks to our board members. You want to stand, board members? There's a few of you here, so let's stand. While I give our panelists just a little time to finish up their breakfast, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Carson College today. We revamped our undergraduate program 3 years ago, very timely, just before the pandemic hit us that spring. And our first class of who we call our next Carson Cougs is now entering their senior year. They've had some real ups and downs, as you can imagine, over the last 3+ years as they head for graduation. We've had a few already graduate, those on the fast track, but the program itself is really, I would say, re-hitting its stride with the changes we've made. We've developed a number of new learning opportunities that really propel students towards success in this new program. We've got things going on like an annual marketing symposium. We've got new professional certificates as well as majors in wine and beverage, business management, senior living. We've got a corporate scholars program focused on solving real challenges for businesses across disciplines, as well as a consulting program that takes our students into the community to develop their skills, but also work with small organizations gearing toward growth. This is all in complement with a rebuilt curricular program that introduces first-year students to the study of business, and over the course of their time with us, requires them to participate in activities outside the classroom that will develop their professional skills, career readiness, ability to work in the outside world, and just in general get our Cougs ready for success from day one in their careers. We have also taken some of the good stuff that we've done in our Vancouver campus, and I should mention we're at 4 live campuses as well as online programs across the state. 4 live campuses in Vancouver, Everett, Tri-Cities, and the flagship in Pullman. Our Vancouver campus has always been very innovative. And the consulting program I mentioned earlier, developed in Vancouver, as was our professional sales program, developed in Vancouver and now brought to Pullman. And we've hired some new faculty to staff that program. And we have seen real growth in sales classes. And those serve not only our Carson College business students, but all majors across WSU. We've also continued to focus on our international opportunities for students. Professor Deepra Jha is here with us today, introducing a new study abroad program last spring, our first one to get back enrolling after the pandemic in Dubai. And so Deepra and the students continue to push forward along with many of our other faculty who lead students in study abroad. The success of our international programs continues to be recognized nationally. We're ranked this year number 21 by U.S. News & World Report for international business programs. We also continue to have success in realizing support from our stakeholders for the program that take us into realms where we can do more for students than we could based on what our students pay in tuition and what the state allocates to us. That, of course, is the support of generous donors to the Carson College, or as our naming donor, Scott Carson, calls them, investors. And we recently received 2 anonymous gifts or investments, Scott, if you're listening, to our accounting program, totaling $5 million that will enable, those endowments will enable continued support for student success in accounting, again, that goes above and beyond the kinds of things we can do typically to support student success. And so we're really grateful for that kind of external support. That support also enables us to have the confidence financially to build the faculty that we need to deliver smaller classes and more personal experiences to students. And excited to say that this year in the college, we brought on 9 new faculty across the college to continue to help our students learn and be ready for success. So that's what's going on in the college. We're very excited about what's going on. I should say at WSU, everybody's excited to be back fully in person without masks, and it does make a big difference. Don't let anyone kid you, and I think probably those of you who are in the workplace know this as well. Don't let anyone kid you. It does make a big difference to be able to gather together fully, and the enthusiasm of students, faculty, and staff, I think, is as high as it's ever been, at least that we're seeing in the Carson College. And one of the things the students, I think, increasingly want to know is, hey, what's going on in the world that we're about to enter? And in some places, we have a hard time telling them. And that often inspires us to come up with a topic for the Power Breakfast. And today's topic is right in the wheelhouse of what the heck is going on out there. Of course, in the world of supply chain and supply chain management, it truly is a fascinating time to be learning about what's going on in supply chain. I'm sure it's a fascinating time for those of you whose businesses are affected by the supply chain as well, but it may be less enjoyable for you than it is for those of us who study it and try to teach it as you're hammered with the ups and downs and the situations every day. And so we're going to talk about that this morning and see what we can learn from our panelists. I have a few questions for them, but I will also save some time for those of you in the audience to ask a few questions as well once we get going. So with that, I'd like to invite Ann, Kathy, Jeff, and Adam up to the stage. Take your seats, and we'll get going with the program. I'd like to start by noting that our panelists have all graduated from WSU with undergraduate or master's degrees, but across a range of But across a range of programs. One of our goals for the Carson College, in addition to having top-rated online programs and being the school of choice for undergrads who want to study business, is to make sure that we are bringing business education across the university and beyond, regardless of whether you're majoring in business or not. So you'll see the diverse background of our panelists is pretty interesting. And rather than me traipse through it, what I thought I'd start by doing is ask each panelist in turn to share just a bit about your background, as well as currently where you work and what your position is. And we'll start with Ann Artizon from Alaska.
Good morning. I'm a proud graduate of WSU, where I studied accounting and economics. And I started my career with Alaska Airlines many moons ago. I'm I can't imagine a world without working at Alaska Airlines. And we're sort of joking at my table this morning that some folks switch jobs a lot in today's world. And one thing that's benefited me is really just having a ton of experience with the airline. So I started in finance, I worked in accounting, I worked in marketing, operations, and I've run supply chain for the last 10 years. Obviously, we're not a manufacturer, so supply chain looks very different from an airline point of view than if you were a manufacturer, but we still have tremendous challenges, one of which is making sure we get our airplanes delivered on time. So that's me.
Thank you, Ann.
Good morning. Kathy Bloomquist, Vice President of Sales for DTH Expeditors. And I took a little different path. I graduated in clothing and textiles. And upon graduation, I had an acquaintance said, why don't you go and interview with this company called Network Courier? And they put material on commercial airlines and do a door-to-door next flight out. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I went and interviewed and was fascinated with it. And I've been in the industry ever since.
Thanks, Kathy. Jeff?
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm a late blooming Coug. I graduated from the EMBA program in 2014. My wife was a bachelor Coug from a long time ago, so when I decided that I was going to leave her at home with 3 young children and go off and pursue higher education, I figured I better do it at Washington State University. My career has been in medical devices, and some of the more recent highlights divesting from Medtronic and standing up operations in Europe and Asia, so getting to live in Amsterdam and travel the continent and get us set up for our own individual operations. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was working for a small ventilator company in Bothell, Washington that happened to partner with General Motors to build 30,000 ventilators in the span of 30 days, which was a pretty amazing experience. And more recently here, I've shifted back into the defibrillation space, which is where Kestra Medical Technologies lives in Kirkland. So a wearable product that is challenged with not doing its own manufacturing, but completely outsourcing the partnerships of supply chain.
Thanks, Jeff. Adam?
All right, so I graduated in advertising and ended up not working at all in advertising. So I have that fancy communication degree that I immediately went to business school instead. So I went to get my MBA in supply chain from TCU, and then from there went on to become a strategy consultant with Accenture and working in a whole bunch of fields. Aerospace was probably the biggest one, and high tech. And that led me down to, when I decided to not be a consultant anymore, to do transformation and strategy for supply chain within a company. So I found a good home for that within Microsoft. And so I do the cloud supply chain, doing strategy and transformation for the procurement and sourcing functions. And we build the data centers that everybody else uses. So it's sort of like the first half of the supply chain all the way up until we build the actual data center, and then it sort of stops. It never gets delivered. There's no like end customer to a data center. It's just for ourselves. So it's sort of an unusual way to do supply chain management, but it's a fun challenge because there's not a whole lot of established right and wrong ways to do things. So we get to refigure out all the same lessons that we learned the first time, but within a different context there. So it's a lot of fun at Microsoft.
Great, thanks. As you can tell, we've got really diverse industry perspectives on this panel. And for those of you taking notes, I'll want to crib them after you're done here while I try to keep the discussion moving a little bit because there's just so many ways to look at this. Thought I'd start us with just a kind of a general introduction, and especially since we push our students to do this as well. I'll ask each of the panelists to give us a kind of elevator pitch answer. So keep it crisp to a couple of questions. What are the 2 or 3 keys to successful supply chain management? And have these keys changed either during or because of the recent pandemic? Andy, would you like to start?
I'd love to. So 3 come to mind. Probably first and foremost is talent and experience. Heavy emphasis on experience, especially during COVID, with such a large loss of just the employee base. Having folks that know how to run an airline is super important. Secondly, would be good cost management. For Alaska, our cost structure and productivity are huge, so everything we do in supply chain has to have a cost focus. And my third thing would just be supply chain visibility, being able to see the risks all the way down the chain.
Thanks. Kathy?
Being in the time critical shipping arena is door to door, next flight out, and expedited ground. And these are typically customers who use us have a need for something that has a time definite situation to it. And so we're a little bit different than having something delivered via FedEx or UPS because of the time criticalness of it. We're open 24 hours, 7 days a week. We never sleep. And usually, customers that call us want communication. So communication during the shipping process is a very key component, I think, to this part of shipping as it applies to the supply chain. And ease of technology. They want to be updated to the moment, whether it's via satellite, which pushes where the driver's positioning is to them. And also, I think just the old-fashioned being able to call and talk to someone, and they can feel comfortable in knowing that we're on top of it, and we know exactly where their material is, and communicate that type of warmth, and we've got you covered. So.
Jeff?
Well, I'll agree with Ann with people and relationships, and in particular during the pandemic, relationships is what got stuff done more often than not. They had to make choices between who they were going to support. They were supporting people that had established that relationship. So I think it's about people and relationships. And the other piece that I will say, it's about problem solving and just the ability to look at problems from a different perspective as the environment around you is changing, and the pandemic was certainly a large change. How do we look at problem solving within that new context? So those are really kind of the two pieces for me.
I like the data visibility and the problem solving. Those are two that I'd echo as well. Traditionally, adaptability and agility have always been sort of hallmarks of supply chain and dealing with those supply chain problems. But over the last couple of years, those have kind of put on a back seat to availability and capacity. The availability of the things that you need. Can you get what you need to get? And is there even capacity to get them to you? So those are the two things that have kind of temporarily, I think, replaced those other items as our current main focuses of getting that availability first and foremost.
So I have a follow-up, which any of you can take on to this. So none of you, and now I'm starting to scratch my head and look at our faculty, none of you mentioned doing math or like designing algorithms. So faculty, I don't know what this means, but is that because it's you just take it for granted, you got to have good models, and so that's just table stakes? Or is it
price
really?
of admission.
What's it?
Price of admission.
Price of admission.
It's the ticket to get you in. Once you're there, what are you able to do with it?
We mentioned it in the name of data and visibility because there's lots of math built into all of those things, because a lot of that data is going to be numerical, it's going to be quantitative. We need to know how big, how much, how soon, and all those things have the math and the algorithms. And a lot of things that happen in supply chain are also built on the technologies that can bring some of those things up. So yes, it is taken for granted that you absolutely have to have those kinds of things, but to get toward the end result of being able to know what you need to know when you need to know it.
Yeah, and I did mention talent, and part of talent is what I'll call just talent diversity. But strong analytics is becoming more and more necessary in supply chain.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking out. Where's Tom Tripp? Yeah, so Tom over there waving, he led our curriculum redesign. And I think, Tom, this tells us we're on the right track, right? Because we said, from what we heard, was our students' technical skills are critical. Don't relax on those. But the differentiators will be the ability to build relationships and to communicate. So what a relief. They both matter, right? Yeah, that's right. We still have some math in there. Another thing we're interested in is risk. And I wonder if, and again, now I can sort of throw this out there in any order, how do supply chain leaders, in your experience, anticipate risks and how will they manage them? What are the biggest risks you face? I realize we touched on this a little bit earlier, but tell us a little bit about your approaches to risk.
So the risk that we have in the cloud supply chain is on shortages, just like everybody else in the high tech and everything else businesses that, circuitry, microchips, integrated circuits, all of that stuff is built into pretty much all the products, and ours are no different. So for us, availability is the biggest single piece of current risk that we've got. My portion of the supply chain, being in the sourcing side of things, is making sure we have the visibility to know where those shortages might be coming from so that we can get ahead of them earlier. Our lead times have been deliberately extended. We are looking further into the future. We are trying to get as many of the suppliers and partners that we have to also go with us on the journey to look further into the future. And so that's one of the big areas that we're doing to get that visibility to know where those risks are to get in front of them.
Supply chain is definitely a support function in Alaska, but we've become so much more relevant with the onset of COVID and all the challenges present. But it's really changed some aspects of the business significantly. One being that we have an awful lot of single source suppliers. Just think about the structure of an airline. We are primarily Boeing. Of course, Boeing is really our single source provider, and they do a fantastic job for us. But related to the airplanes, there's just a lot of single source suppliers. And during COVID, when we were running out of critical parts, we had to start looking outside of single source in some cases, which is super tough to do. As you can imagine, anything that goes on a plane, you can't just switch out a part. It goes through significant certification and safety process, and it takes a long time. So you have to think way, way upstream. The other thing is we don't like to tie up our money in large assets, and inventory being one of them. So just-in-time inventory is an important piece to us, but that really hampered our predictability during COVID, so much so that we really had to think through that whole piece. And maybe lastly is a knowledge of raw materials. So as we saw the shortages, particularly in microchips, we had to look at where those raw materials were coming back and go back 2 or 3 suppliers in the supply chain and make sure we were getting what we needed on time.
Yeah, I would echo exactly what Ann talked about. We've had to dive much deeper into the supply chain and look where we want to manage that risk for suppliers that we wouldn't traditionally do. So petroleum-based products, microchips. I find it very intriguing and interesting that the Toyota production system that is built on just-in-time, Toyota stopped doing just-in-time because of the pandemic. They've had to look at their problem in a different way that has been something that they haven't. They've chosen deliberately not to, are famous for not looking at it for 30, 40, 50 years, and they've decided that they have to manage their risk in a different way. So I would echo Ann's comments almost to the T.
And I think looking to our customers, when they think about risk, it's, can you deliver on time? What is your capacity? And we've all gone through the labor challenges of not having enough drivers, not having the trucks and the equipment available at the time that is needed. So we have worked very hard on keeping the relationships very strong with our suppliers, which would be our drivers and our talent. The other part of that would be increased fuel costs. That's one of our biggest risks right now. And increased fuel always leads to inflation of what we pay our drivers, what we pay our talent. So we have been working, again, back to relationships in keeping up with our sources as it relates to increased costs.
You mentioned talent, Kathy, and Ann was talking about it before. Where's the talent going to come from going forward in the supply chain area? With Carson College, we've got undergraduate business programs, MBA programs. There's also trade schools. There's certificates out there. What kinds of channels are going to supply the talent that you'll be looking for to strengthen your organizations and in the supply chain area?
Well, we're really looking at a younger generation, and it's been interesting, I think, through the pandemic that we've had a lot of our new talent tell us that, it's really hard to find this. We can't go to the store and just expect something to be on the shelf. And I think one of our first lessons was toilet paper. It was like, why is this so scarce? We weren't used to that. And since that episode, it seems like we've had a number of other episodes, and I think it's really brought a focus to the shipping side and how something arrives on the shelf. What does it take to get something from A to B? And so we're seeing a lot more interest coming in, from our hires, and they never thought about it before until the pandemic. So.
I think we're pretty fortunate here in the state of Washington. I serve on the advisory board at Western Washington University's Supply Chain Management program as part of their college. The state has expanded that at the University of Washington. I know, boo Huskies, but from an education standpoint, there's a supply chain, both bachelor's and master's program that has been stood up at the University of Washington the last 4 or 5 years. So I think there's pipelines here within the state. But the other one that I would highlight, and it was an emphasis of the Carson EMBA program that I went through, was the entrepreneurship. There are new problems to be solved. There's not going to be enough people to solve them with just brute people. There's a huge opportunity for us as education leaders and business leaders to look at that entrepreneurship and how do we solve those problems in a more effective and efficient way. So I'd say the EMBA program and the entrepreneurship that it kind of champions will be key to solving a lot of those problems. It won't just be able to be throw more people at it.
The type of people that I usually look for, and not just people that have come through a supply chain program, but I like interviewing people that have engineering backgrounds, people that have, in my own case, communication backgrounds, so a wide variety of people. And I'm looking for the type of folks that aren't just linear thinking about, it goes from the shipper to the warehouse to the here, but maybe systems thinkers or network thinking about, like Jeff said, about looking at the problem in several different ways, and thinking about the fact that it's, even though it's a supply chain, it's commonly referred to as a huge network of lots of different players, and be able to think in multiple dimensions is a critical piece of what I look for when I'm building up the team.
Yeah, ditto that comment. Just again, talent diversity is so important.
Yep.
And a shout out to my Alaska Airlines teams, a number of folks who are with supply chain, but we support the IT division, we support the marketing division, commercial, maintenance engineering. And we not only look for folks that come in from the outside, but also internal folks, maybe folks that have worked in the operation that really understand what makes the airline tick. And they are fantastic to bring into the supply chain group. And because, again, we need that analytical thinking. We need folks that are really good at contract management. We need folks that are good at negotiations. And we need folks that are really good at building relationships with the divisions we support.
Thinking about this from my perspective as a leader of a college of business, I'm thinking, okay, so if we need to focus, and I kind of alluded to this before, as we listen to our stakeholders, what are 1 or 2 skills you think we, not just the Carson College, but colleges, MBA programs, colleges of business, 1 or 2 skills that we could do a better job of inculcating in our students, having them come to the table a little more ready for you?
Well, I think putting the students in situations where they have to problem solve and have an experience where they've got to be flexible. because life changes so fast, and especially in the industry where I'm in the niche of time critical. You have start out with plan A, and all of a sudden you've got to figure out plan B and C because you might just end up there. So.
Yeah, really a heavy focus on supply chain concepts. So don't just teach them what ERP systems do. Actually go through case studies, very heavy case study approach. So you have to look at the problem from all different angles.
I'm going to combine two things we've already brought up several times already, and that is analytics and communication. And putting those two together, it's not just enough to know how to understand where the answer is coming from, but also how to communicate that to others, get everybody else on board, and to work with those relationships to be able to say, here's the data, here's what it's showing us, and there's some clear options that we have to work with. And it's not just the hard stuff, it's not just the soft stuff, it's where they intersect.
Great. A lot to think about, team. Good. Switching gears a little bit, and this picks up on several things that have already been remarked on, but I want to focus a little bit more on, I think, and especially during the pandemic that it was dramatized, supply chains are global, and they present different kind of challenges as a function of being global. What kinds are central to your businesses that with a focus on that global dimension?
So with the global issue, I think for us really two things: increased volatility and lead times. We've had to depend on getting supplies in areas of the world that we never had to source before. I'll call it just sort of one early example in COVID is when, we have 22,000 employees and suddenly overnight we had to get masks and gloves and hand sanitizers for everyone. And the suppliers that we'd had in place for years, we had a trusted relationship and maybe a stocking program. Suddenly they couldn't provide that to us. And our team had to step in with the existing staff and create brand new processes behind the scenes to get all that stuff to them. And there was such a ramp up in demand. How do you figure out how much supply you need when suddenly you have to supply sanitizer to all your customers? I mean, it's just a huge, huge undertaking. I was actually maybe a little bit thankful for all that toilet paper running out in the grocery stores, because I think it gave all of us a glimpse of, this is really weird. How can we possibly be out of toilet paper? But geopolitical constraints certainly are something that we have to look at. We also manage fuel, and of course, when the war situation broke out in March, suddenly the price of fuel went skyrocketing. Fuel represents up to 30% of the cost structure for airlines. So, that again took a dedicated focus. Volatility was certainly something that we had to be very mindful of. And then lead times. Another example is getting our uniforms. Our uniforms are all produced in China, and guess what? We couldn't get them here fast enough. We had the tremendous turnover in labor with our frontline groups. We hired, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 employees this last year, which is big for us. And we suddenly had to look at different ways of getting those uniforms to us. Normally they'd come on a ship, and instead we had to fly them in, and guess what? It costs 3 to 4 times more to do that. So very, very challenging.
Looking to the global supply chain, really, that is a whole industry in itself, just a whole field in shipping. So we look at that as having really good education in international shipping, customs compliance, because the last thing that our customers want is something stuck in customs. And again, that's a great field to go into, and just having that sort of knowledge and brain power is super important in our industry.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? How do people develop their competence in that area? Is it just brute experience, or is there formal ways to get up to speed on the diversity of rules out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is brute. I mean, you've got to get out there and learn it, but there also are a lot of courses that you can take in customs, brokerage, and country requirements for import-export.
It's great if you can't sleep at night. Just read a customs manual. I think business in general, we looked at outsourcing for multiple decades as a way to help experience, cost favorability. And the last few years have showed us that there are more factors that need to be considered with that. Certainly, it doesn't mean that I don't see us getting away from globalization. I think that globalization and being able to go where there's expertise and go where there's partners that can do good work for you is still important, but you have to manage the multiple variables around risk, that it's not as straightforward or as easy as I think business thought and wanted it to be.
So this question's a little odd because I don't think there's anything that isn't a global supply chain. There's nothing that doesn't work in a global way. And even if you're sourcing things from the supplier down the street, they're still impacted by energy markets. They're still impacted by transportation availability. They're still impacted by other ways that they're getting their materials from. So everything is global. I'm like in my area, I'm working with some suppliers that have operations in 3 different continents, and time zones become an issue. And learning to have meetings at 5 a.m. and then 11 p.m. on the same day is a reality of the global supply chain world. So just thinking globally at the beginning is sort of like the starting point to me. Just assume global is going to happen because that's the reality.
And then, Adam, if I could follow that up, with global, we've got a heightened, the pandemic, and now with the ground war in Europe, we've got a heightened sensitivity to disruptions in the supply chain. How do each of you think about disruptors and disruptions globally? What are they? How do you anticipate them? How do you react when a war breaks out? Tell us a little bit about your thinking on disruptors.
I'm not so much looking for where the next disruption is. I'm making sure I'm ready for whatever the next disruption is. That the way I'm thinking about it is being, the buzzword of the last couple of years is resilience, and making sure that we don't just have one option. So a lot of things that are happening within my supply chain is multi-sourcing, and we're also throwing in a new word, multi-geo, which is we're getting things from multiple different places around the world. So it's not just saying we're getting stuff from one country in Asia, we're getting things from several countries in Asia or several other continents as well. So we're spreading out where our sources are, our suppliers are, so that any one disruption isn't going to be the Achilles heel for the whole system.
Yeah, I would say, very similar for us that in geography, for geography has been kind of a theme for a little while now. And even with a medical device where similar to an airline, you can't, the FDA is very, we're very tightly controlled. We are our product is the highest classification of regulatory category, that the FDA has. So it's hard for us to diversify that supply chain, but you want to partner with people that have the ability to spread that risk for you. You want to be able to look at things in a way that minimizes or allows you to Adam's point, to react to whatever that next disruptor is. In March, the wire that we use and the polyurethane coating that goes on a wire. The fact that I even know the word polyurethane bothers me. But they couldn't get a shipment out of a port in northern Germany because there was a sudden invasion in that area, and so they weren't comfortable with secure shipping just yet in March. And it's all right. Where else in the world does that polyurethane exist? And the tunneled thinking of, well, I only go, this is our customer or our supplier here in the United States, and they may, no, there's other suppliers in Asia. Let's look at the other direction and where can we adjust and expand our own thinking and capabilities to recognize where you have other opportunities.
Yeah, Alaska has very, very similar challenges to you. So we really see shipping capacity, raw material shortages, global conflict are sort of the three big disruptors that we're having to deal with. And I think one of the things that's made a difference for us is really relationship with our suppliers. So as I mentioned, we have to do a lot more work. In the past, we would have an expectation of when something was going to arrive. We no longer can sort of rest assured that what the system's telling us is going to happen. So we actually have to set up systems behind the scene to reach out to suppliers 2 to 3 layers deep and ask them a lot of probing questions to make sure that if I was sitting in their shoes, I know exactly what's going on with their raw materials. And I think that's been our best way to really try to minimize the impact of the risk.
And I think as far as transportation goes, labor scarcity has been a big disruptor. And that leads all the way from just talent within our operation organization, all the way down to just drivers and trucks and equipment. Our service partners, such as the airlines, haven't been able to staff their cargo facilities to meet all the flights that are scheduled. So sometimes we can't use a certain flight because cargo's closed and we're not able to recover and deliver on time. So that's been the big area for us. And I think we've mentioned this so much, but relationships go such a long ways. Our drivers sometimes have personal relationships with the airline cargo facility. Sometimes they can pull markers depending on what the situation is. So we just really work deeply and very closely with all of our labor out in the country and the world.
Great, thanks. You know, I got a big old stack of questions here and a bunch more now that you've been talking, but I think maybe someone else's turn. So if there are any questions from the audience, Angie over here has a microphone. If anybody would like to get their question answered. Yeah, Darren's got one over here.
I don't need a microphone. So, listening to you four kind of gave me a small number of hives. I'll start right now. We're at Unify, we're total data nerds, and I have kind of a two-part question. One is, oh, thank you. I think that you have, you talked about risk, flexibility, so many, dependencies, complications in your jobs. One, how do you, and the analytics are behind it, how do you prioritize what you're doing, like from your data and your pieces of data? How do you prioritize that? And then two, do you actually trust the data that you guys have based on so many different things going on?
We have a philosophy, trust but verify. And that motto is more important now than ever. And actually, I forgot the very first part of your question. How do you prioritize? That's been a little bit of learn as you go. We've made some mistakes, and I think if we learned anything, we learned just how good our processes were or were not. And so much you think you have a fantastic process in place. It might have even taken you years to put it in place, and then suddenly you've lost key people, and that process isn't nearly as good as you thought it was. So it's really called out the weaknesses and areas where we can improve.
I joined Microsoft about a year ago, and when I had joined, they said, congratulations, you're now our new data champion. So congratulations, you get to worry about how good is your data and make sure it's all there and get started. And so that was a re-education for me on just how much supply chain is a data-oriented function. It is all about the data in ways that most other business functions just aren't. And so when it comes to prioritizing what to look for and what to work on, the data is the thing that is, as much as possible, is leading us to how to know where things are, how to know what things are really actually going to be a bigger problem than others. And the more we can quantify and the more we can get those problems understood, the better we are going to be at being able to get in front of them.
Yeah, I would say the traditional sources, ERP, MRP, and some of the algorithms that have been built into that aren't robust enough to deal with the situation that we face currently. There's too much variability, right? Those systems it's a predictable lead time. You need to order, you buyer action message, you got to order this part at this time. or take care of this operation with this kind of a lead time, they're not built with the level of robustness around the variability that we would need now today. So you're working around it through different processes, talented people, and having to kind of work on the fly.
I think as far as prioritizing, we try to keep things very simple. We have a pickup, we have a delivery, and we have a commitment time. And we do have technology in our operating systems that help us choose the flight that is the higher percentage of arriving on time, going to make a connection if that is necessary. And so we just work through that to pick the best choice and communicate all the way with the customer. So we're a little more simple.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Franco. I work for Stryker Redmond, which makes Class 3 medical device. So I'm the engineering manager there, and we consume around 500 million electronic components every year on 3 product lines. So we had the same supply chain issues for all the product lines. And I have 2 questions. One is, so in addition to the supply chain, the component manufacturers, they are changing their strategy. Like, for example, NXP, they used to sell their components for medical devices, but now their automotive grade revenue is more than medical device. For example, their automotive grade is like 60%, for medical device it's 2%. They said like, we're not going to sell components to you. That's one strategy change. And some of the Japanese manufacturer, they said we are not going to sell their components for medical device. They claim some other regulatory reasons, but they're trying to get more money from the other market. So due to the FDA requirements, it takes 2 to 3 years to change a component in medical device. So how are we addressing this in your companies? Like, are we facing such challenges, or how do you fix it?
Well, I don't know if you remember Franco, but
Yeah.
I ran supply chain for Stryker for a little while.
I was telling my
And I'm glad they're your problems now. And not mine. But, certainly from the medical device standpoint, we are the tail trying to wag the dog, and that is not new, right? The commercial electronics industry, the automotive industry, the airline industry, these are the big players that drive the pace of change. And, the medical device regulations in Europe and the United States and other areas are written to prevent you from changing. There's been decades and decades of data and studies that says when you change stuff, you mess it up. And that's where the largest risk is to patient safety. So, I think it behooves us to be nimble. We're facing the same things. We're buying the same kinds of components that for our defibrillator that you are for yours. And sadly, a lot of the engineering department, instead of 50% of the engineering department, instead of coming up with new ideas and new technologies and advancing the patient care, they're having to deal with supply chain issues. So it's a big people and attention suck to do that. So there's no silver bullet that I've got for you. It's just a lot of work to go through.
Okay, thank you. And the second question I had is on the using the broker buy parts. So there are so many parts available in the market, even though there are no standard parts, the brokers are coming with 10x, 100x price, and they are selling it. And some of the parts are like 28 years old from the brokers. So some of them are older than me, like I'm 36 now, so and I don't know how they are getting those parts, and it works. So we tested some reliability testing and other, it works. So our product has to be in the field for minimum 8 years. So we are not allowing that part, but unfortunately some of the modules, they are replacing it without our knowledge. So those components will fail in the field over the period of time. It may be applicable for all the products what you are buying. So they are using very old components. So since you're in aerospace and medical, which is higher level, do you have any mechanism to prevent this? Or are you preparing for the future, like in terms of risk and other mitigations?
I certainly get yelled at on a fairly weekly basis by my CFO and my CEO because I'm paying $312 for a part that 6 months ago cost us $4.58. And I mean, you get into right, there's entrepreneurs out there that, that's the nicest word I can use for them. In these times, they'll go and buy and they'll find old components or other things that are key and critical to business. And they, if any of you have children out there, sons in particular that want a particular version of Nike shoe, it's the same kind of marketplace, right? There's scarcity in supply, so they take advantage of that. Again, no silver bullet there. We're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for components that we really shouldn't, but it's an opportunity cost play for us. The cost of us not having product available and not being able to take care of a patient, from a life-saving technology, just like you've got at Stryker, if you don't have that, the cost is justified.
I've got a slightly different reaction to that question, and that is, this isn't going to go away. In fact, we're actually trying to embrace it in a much bigger way if we think about it in terms of being a circular supply chain or the reusability, renewability. So it's not just that there's the price scalping aspect of it, which of course gouging and stuff will happen where opportunities happen, but the changing of the suppliers' strategies is also the fact that we're changing our own strategies too. And so the collaboration between our strategies changing and our suppliers' strategies changing means that we can be more circular, we can reuse more things, we can find places where brokers can give us access to components that we would otherwise have to just buy new. And we don't always have to just buy new. So there's the good side and the bad side both with this type of thing.
Okay. One quick question. You mentioned COVID, the pandemic, as well as the war, right? What about cyber attacks, right? The large one with SolarWinds that's affected your supply chain as well as your supply chain, right? How's that affected you to reshape the supply chain, right? Or transform it? Or is there any takeaways or recommendations or advice that you've experienced during that?
Well, one example comes to mind immediately, and that's with fuel on the East Coast. We had a shutdown of the major pipeline last year due to a cyber attack, and all the airlines use that on the East Coast quite significantly. So we are on the verge of having to almost shut down U.S. industry if it had continued any further than it did. Behind the scenes, we were desperately trying to get information on exactly what was going on. It was hard to get information, and you quickly realize that the folks that run the pipeline, this was, it's a new game for everybody. There's no playbook on how you respond to this. I can tell you that cybersecurity is super important to us, but I still think it's a whole new ballgame.
One situation that comes to mind, and that was many years ago, but was 9/11, and that was when all the commercial airlines had to go down, and we still had material to move, and we had to go back to really the old-fashioned way of more of a Pony Express. On the ground with driving. And we still got material delivered. It was later than expected, but at least we had the material moving. Cybersecurity and different types of situations like that are what we think about all the time. If our technology goes down, we're not able to see where our drivers are, where our flights are. So it is something that we continue to think about, and it is a new ballgame.
Hi, so it's working. Carly Barrich, alumni for EMBA. Thank you for being here and sharing your insights on the external pressures of supply chain. I am curious, as you are talking with your teams and going through very quick decisions, what is the level of environmental sustainability in your discussions, and where do you see that going in the future if you think that might be more of a pressure than it is today?
So as an airline, we have this little problem called carbon emissions out of planes, and there is no easy solution for that. There's not going to be any battery technology that takes us to a sustainable solution anytime in the next couple decades, so we're heavily reliant on sustainable aviation fuel. It's a fantastic solution. It's safe. It's proven technology. The only big problem is there's none available.
Details.
Details. It's a developing market, truly. It's going to change the face of airlines over the next couple decades, but we have to start getting producers. We need government policy to support it. I could write a book on this subject. Airlines absolutely need it. It allows us to reduce our carbon emissions between 30 to 80% right out of the gate if we can convert to sustainable aviation fuel. It's a fantastic solution all the way around. But if you're here in this room and want to help support something, be sure and tell Congress that we'd love to have more support for sustainable aviation fuel, and it takes up an awful lot of our time at Alaska.
I think Adam touched on it, right? How much reusability can we build into the supply chain? What does the circular supply chain look like? I think, two questions in a row of things I didn't think about 20 years ago, cybersecurity and environmental sustainability, but there's certainly strategies and smart people out there doing great work to help us think about that the reusability of devices, the reusability of electronics, the recyclability. How do you build that in from the design concept of whatever business you're operating all the way through, that there's wonderful opportunities there and real ways to do it, not just there's cost benefits to it, there's environmental benefits to it, there's business benefits to it.
Before I was at Microsoft, I was a supply chain consultant, and one of my clients really proved the point that companies don't change unless they put this into their P&L or otherwise publicly documented sources. If they're not going to measure it, they're not going to change it. And so any company that I read about or see that's talking a big game around ESG, if they're not actually putting numbers out there, then that's nice and all, but it's not really actually going to move the needle at all. So when I see sustainability, when I see ESG as being a big corporate item, at least with Microsoft, I know that we are publishing those things quarterly, and I am measured as part of my supply chain on what we're doing to reduce the environmental impact. Data centers take up a huge amount of electricity. Most of them are built in a way that tries to optimize that, and we are going to be, I think, net negative here within, I forget the actual target, something like within 10 years or something like that. So being in those companies and seeing what they look like, if you're not measuring it, there's action's not going to get taken.
We have time for one or two more.
I've been reflecting a little bit on Jeff, your earlier comment about Toyota rethinking its production system. And at the same time, for the same 20 or 30 years that Toyota's been following that strategy, we've been following supply strategies that have to do with more outsourcing of production and development and more globalization of those. And I'm wondering if you think the pandemic is going to cause us to rethink that, to bring much more manufacturing back much closer to where it's being used, and to bring much more of those things back under the control of firms.
Well, certainly Congress has acted to provide financial incentives to do exactly that. I think that's a good piece for business as well, that it'll allow for better sustainability and robustness. But I don't think, it's not going to get rid of the globalization trend. I think I agree with Adam that everything is global in some form or factor. But there's good things that, we here in America need to be good at, and we need to teach other parts of the world how to be good at things that we currently do well also. So, I think there's just a real opportunity for us to continue to engage globally via business in a way that is productive for not just the United States, but for our allies and partners around the world. So certainly the globalization trend, I don't see it going away, but I think you're going to see a lot more. We need to have technological capabilities here, and too much over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, things have consolidated beyond what is healthy for the supply chain globally.
One more? Yep, one more.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Jennifer. I'm an executive MBA student here. And to continue the trend of things you didn't have to think about 20 years ago, I work for an artificial intelligence services company. So I wanted to get your perspective on what do you think artificial intelligence, or how is it going to impact supply chain and your role going forward?
Again, I think I'm artificially unintelligent, so I think, similar to the first question that we got, the current tools that have been traditionally deployed within supply chain aren't robust enough to deal with the level of variability. And so the opportunities around artificial intelligence and looking at data, we were talking about predictive maintenance at our table a little bit. So how does that factor into sustainability? I think you could get, you could go a lot of different directions with that. And I think that's, why I would agree with Adam on a piece that from an education standpoint is so critical that, got to be able to handle those tools, understand what their capabilities are, and certainly for us as a device, specific to our application, we see, we see 30 million heartbeats a year in our data. And the number one cause of death in the United States is sudden cardiac arrest. So it doesn't get a whole lot of attention. It doesn't have its own month. It doesn't have its own pink color or anything like that. But we see enough heartbeats that artificial intelligence should tell us when we should expect someone to experience sudden cardiac arrest an hour before, half hour before, a day before. Right, so I think there's really cool things that are going to happen with all of this data and cloud and processing capability that the world has, grown accustomed to. We need smart people thinking about how and what to do with it, what the capabilities are, and where the next generation of problems to solve should be.
Very, very cool technology. I think at an airline, you'll see it in the customer facing applications, and it'll be a long time before you see it in the backside.
One of the things I noticed in doing my, back from my consulting days was the technology itself was never actually the point. The point was what it was trying to do. And so we're solving, like Jeff said, we're solving actual problems. The technology itself shouldn't be the solution. It should be how the solution is delivered. So thinking it through, and there's almost never a time when I went to help a company with putting in IoT or edge computing or name your technological buzzword, where it wasn't fixing an underlying business issue first and then coming back and putting in the fancy shiny technology that then makes it really fun. So both are required.
I agree, and I think on the transportation side, you need to think about how does AI reduce energy use, and how does it reduce labor on multiple levels of those two areas?
Well, I think we could probably keep going for quite a while here, but for those of you who aren't working remotely all day, we may find ourselves at time to wrap up. And so the first thing I'd like to do, because in the past I have forgotten to do this, is to thank our panelists, and we've got something for each of you. So traveling light here, since you're local. Yeah, it's always a hit. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Yes.
Kathy.
Thank you very much.
Jeff and Adam. I'm going to assume that clapping was for the Cougar Gold cheese that was in the bags. And so if you'd all join me in thanking our panelists once more, that was terrific. Couple of thoughts as we wrap up. On behalf of the college, I want to say I'm grateful that you're all here. Couple of takeaways for us. I was really intrigued by the thought around supply chain entrepreneurs, and there's a good kind and a bad kind, and what are we doing? And it makes me think of our efforts in our Center for Entrepreneurship, and whether there's a new horizon out here that we can help our students start thinking about. One of the challenges in Pullman is we're a bit remote at times physically from the entrepreneurial ecosystem that's so strong in this state. But I start thinking about all of the possibilities here, and supply chain being one of them. It's really interesting, and we'll have to take that back to our center and catalyze some conversations there. The other thing I think about, and this is something that's become increasingly important to WSU and the Carson College over the last few years, is we got in toward the end into some discussion around the societal impact of what we're doing, and what that impact in turn, what's going on in society, has on us as we do our business. Debbie Campo, who's our Senior Associate Dean for Faculty and Research, is leading us in pulling together a more coherent strategy towards societal impact in the college. Good thing for us to do. Also, our accrediting body is increasingly pressing us to do such a thing. And I think this is great for us to think through at the WSU level what our mission means, our land grant roots, and our obligation to serve the people of the state and region. And as a business school, what we can bring to the table in that same area. And so this definitely sparked some thoughts for me. I'm sure it did for Debbie and the other members of our team that are here. So I really appreciate the perspectives we got. I also want to thank our sponsors one more time. You see the table signs around you. You can clap for yourselves too, but thank you, sponsors. Would not be able to do events like this without the support of sponsors like you, and we're really grateful for it. And for those of you who aren't obliged to hop on a Zoom meeting immediately, we do have the room for a little while, so feel free to stay around and network. Don't let them push you out of here too quick. And we are Cougs, we like to gather. So thanks again for coming this morning. Delighted to have you back in a full room. Go Cougs!